Hey, what's going on there, guys? Nick here from Absolute MTG, and today we are going to be taking a look at a draft that I did at our local card shop. I'm going to be walking you through here, and this is Triple Journey in the Nyx, and the actual format that should be drafted is one Journey, one Born of the Gods, and one Theros. However, we wanted to have some fun for the launch. So I take out my land, I take out my tip card, and what I'm doing here is sorting by color to see if we have any saturations of a certain color in this pack. So you don't necessarily want to be drafting a color that is abundant in your opener, just because it's going to give the impression to other players that that color is open and you drafted something else, and then that they're safe to pick up a card from that color. However, there's also the dilemma where players could think the same thing as you, and then they don't draft that color, but ultimately, I don't want to be drafting blue here just because there's a good chance that other players will pick up blue and will draft like against my color. From here, I'm looking at either the Skink or the Flame Speaker as well, and I end up taking the Skink just because it's a creature, and Flame Speaker as well isn't really that powerful as a pack one pick. But there were only 2 cards in red. That means that if I take that one red card away from the 2, there's only one red card going all the way around by the time it comes back to me, which is pretty good because it gives the impression to other players that there isn't a whole lot of red going around. So from here, because I picked up a red card, pick 1, I am going to try to follow it up with another red card usually, just to kind of solidify myself into that color unless something better happens to pop out at me and just says, hey, you need to draft me because if you don't, you're probably going to get punished for it. But I end up taking the Mogus's Warhound just because it's a pretty fair creature as a 2-drop and it has the bestow cost for 3, making it pretty good in either mode, whether you're playing it early or late game. So from here, we have a decent bit of red. We also have a powerful card being the Laguna Band Trailblazer as a 1-drop heroic card, but we also have Satyr Hoplite. So Satyr Hoplite's really awesome because, again, it's red, it commits us to our color, and the heroic is really relevant just because it's a seemingly strong archetype in just Triple Journey in the Nyx, which may become a thing for like online drafting where for the release queues, or at least for the pre-release queues, you're able to draft online with Triple Journey. So picking up the Satyr is pretty awesome because heroic is fairly strong, especially if you're drafting like red-white. So from here, there isn't really a whole lot of good red stuff going on for us. So I'm pretty much just looking for like another color to commit myself to. So there's Armory and there's also a Johnny's Presence. I end up going with the Johnny's Presence because it's a easy way to trigger off heroic, and it's a pretty good combat trick whether you're trying to get in there and deal a little bit more damage, trigger off heroic, or just to give your creatures indestructible until the end of the turn, which is pretty good. And it has a strive cost, which is amazing. Here, we can either commit ourselves to another red card or another white card. And pretty much for the rest of this draft, I'm picking up cards that are on color for me. There are very few cards that I pick up that aren't on color. And here, I'm pretty much looking at the Sightless Brawler more so than anything because it's another one of those creatures with Bestow. You can cast it and enchant one of your dudes. You can make it really big, and usually the drawback's not too bad, especially if you're playing a very fast-paced deck with like with Boros. Usually you're going to have at least 2 creatures on the battlefield that you can turn sideways and you can smash. And Sightless Brawler makes even just like the smaller creatures you have a whole lot better just because they're going to get +3/+2. But right now, our draft pool looks like 1 Sigiled Skink, 1 Warhound, 1 Hoplite, 1 Johnny's Presence, and 1 Sightless Brawler. So now from here, again, it's just pretty much a battle for what cards I'm going to pick up and are going to be playable for me. So there's the All Sids that I could take, but end up going with the Mortal Obstinacy for another trigger off of our heroic. So right now, as it stands, we have 4 creatures and 2 enablers for heroic that will work for us. And Mortal Obstinacy is actually really sweet in this format just because there are so many enchantments. Like there are enchantment creatures, there are bestow creatures that you can get rid of if you were able to make contact and hit your opponent with a creature that's enchanted by Mortal Obstinacy. And quite a few times it ended up being relevant. More so relevant because I had multiple copies of Mortal Obstinacy by the end of this draft, but it's really good because it gets rid of those bestow creatures that are pretty much just troublesome most times. From here, there's Oppressive Rays. There are a few other... there's Line Breaker in red that stands out to me, and there's also Magma Spray. So here I end up taking the Magma Spray, and interestingly enough, I end up taking this not as much for a card that I plan on using, but it's also good for hate drafting, because if somebody else is playing red, if I go with like a turn 1 heroic card, they're able to, on their turn 1, just play Magma Spray and get rid of it, or even in response, if I try to do something with that card, get rid of it. So from here, I have Dictate. So Dictate was pretty much just drafted as like a, oh hey, this card is a rare, it's on color for me. If I get it off and I'm dealing like a whole bunch of unblocked damage and my opponent doesn't really care about the damage that I'm dealing, maybe I can flash it in and I can deal even more damage. And I actually didn't even end up playing it. My converted mana cost curve only ended up stopping at 4, I think, with only one drop being a Crone Mastiff. But the Dictate was on color, so it was seemingly okay for me. From there, I picked up Flamespeaker's Will, just because Flamespeaker Will was the only on-color playable thing that was in the pack from there. And it's still pretty alright. I mean, it triggers off your heroic. It's not as relevant as Mortal Obstinacy, just because artifacts aren't as huge as enchantments are in this block. So Flamespeaker Will does have the benefit of being relevant whenever you're doing the entire block draft, because it can still hit some troublesome things. It can hit any artifacts that your opponent's playing, like the Armory or the Chariot. In terms of Journey, it can hit the Guardians and Theros and some other stuff like that. So there is a little bit of variety of stuff that you can hit with it, but usually Mortal Obstinacy is just better. From here, the choice is to either take the Eagle or to take the 3/1 for 2 mana, and I end up going with the Eagle just for the evasion. Flying Vigilance 2/1 for 3 is pretty good as just like a 3-drop. The evasion and vigilance is relevant, especially when you make it big, and usually that was the case. From there, I took Laguna Band Trailblazer, and it was pretty clear to me that nobody really wanted it, so white was at least somewhat safe to draft. From there, taking Oppressive Rays being the only other card that's playable for us in our colors. And with 2 last picks, I'm pretty much just forced to, I guess, kind of hate draft. So I ended up taking the Thought's Desire over the other card, just because Thought's Desire is going to allow us to, or is going to allow my opponent to just tap down our things with that 4 mana. And then Font of Return was the last card drafted, which pretty much just was what we had. We didn't have a choice to draft it. So now, opening up our second pack, I end up rare drafting, and it was a pretty reasonable rare draft, I think, because it was extremely playable, and it's a very, very good card. So we end up taking Launch the Fleet. Again, on color for us, playable, works with heroic, especially if we have multiple heroic creatures on the battlefield, and it makes a bunch of dudes for us. I didn't get to play it that often. I think I only played it in 2 of the rounds that I played. But Launch the Fleet is definitely still sweet whenever you're making more 1/1s that are on the attack of your own creature is going to be attacking your opponent as well. And I think the best play that I had with it was being able to play it on turn 4 with a open field and putting it on like 2 of my creatures to make 2 more 1/1s. That was pretty much like the most optimal use of it that I had. From here, I'm pretty much just looking for more on-color playable things. There's the High Priest and there's Nyx Fleece Ram. So the High Priest is really sweet because it lets you take things back, but usually it's either going to be that I'm going to try to out-tempo my opponent, or I'm going to try and find a way to stall while making like evasion happen for me or something like that. So I end up taking the Nyx Fleece Ram just because it's a 0/5 for 2 mana that lets my opponent gain 1 life if they have it. So that's usually a card that I don't want them to be able to use. From here, there is the 2/2 that protects himself, which I don't end up drafting. There's Aegis, which I could rare draft. There's also a Eagle and a Magma Spray. So again, like I mentioned for the previous Magma Spray that we drafted, there's the whole concept of hate drafting it essentially so people aren't using it against us and getting rid of our creatures whenever we're trying to do fun and silly things with them, with Heroic. So taking away that Magma Spray means that I don't have to worry about it or anybody that is in red having it and playing it. So again, from here, looking at more red cards, we're taking the Satyr Hoplite and just finding more one-drop heroic creatures for us to be able to play. From this point in the draft, honestly, it ends up just being a nice way to find more things that we've already drafted and just draft them in multiples. And especially like with the Hoplite, we end up with 3 copies of it. From here, we're taking Warhound and Warhound over the Magma Spray. Just because at this point, the Warhound is pretty much just better for us. We don't want to draft way too many cards that are taking us away from our initial strategy, and Magma Spray does have the downside of us not being able to hit our opponent with it. So Warhound's taken there just as another 2-drop creature or 3-drop enchantment on our heroic dudes. And ultimately, we end up drafting, I think, 3 of the Warhounds. Yeah, 3 of the Warhounds by the end of this entire thing. So from here, we have the choice of Flamespeaker's Will, Oppressive Rays, or Armament of Nyx. And I ended up taking the Armament of Nyx over the Oppressive Rays just because in my mind I was thinking like, all right, well, we already have the Sightless Brawler, we already have the Mokus's Warhound. If we're able to put it on our enchantment creature, it has double strike. So that was like the only upside that it had to the difference between like the pseudo removal that you have for creatures. Here we have Cavalry, again Armament or Oppressive Rays, and I end up taking another Armament just because, again, it's 2 different modes, kind of like Bestow Creatures for us, where we can either use one or we can use the other. And it's kind of like pacifism, but not really pacifism because your opponent's creature can still block. And if it's bigger than your creature, then it can just kind of block you for days. But preventing the damage that it deals is usually very, very good. From here, we end up taking Mortal Obstinacy. Pretty much just kind of like one of the only playable white cards that we had in that pack. And it was just pretty easily taken. I end up in the draft having 3 Mortal Obstinacy, 3 of which that I end up playing. And the only real trouble that I had with deck building was having a variety of different cards that would enable heroic that are playable for me. So I had multiple Flamespeaker's Wills, I had multiple Mortal Obstinacy, and then they end up being played just because they actually hit things in this format. So from here, a Crowan Mastiff is there, Pensive Minotaur is there, but Pensive Minotaur really isn't that good, so we can just take them. Solidarity is in the pack as well, which is a troublesome card whenever you're playing against other heroic decks, especially like green-blue heroic or something like that, just because I did end up facing against 2 green-blue decks that were playing it. From there, we take the High Priest just because it's nice and shiny for us, but it's actually playable still too. Another Eagle from this pack to give us another 3-drop Flying Vigilance dude. From here, all 3 cards could potentially be taken away, but Flurry of Horns is pretty much just the best one. We don't end up playing it. Sorcery Speed puts 2/3 red Minotaurs onto the battlefield with haste. However, it's a little bit too expensive for our taste for this deck. We want to be playing very low curve stuff. Here we take Harvest Guard All Sids. It's a little bit more relevant than the other card. And then the last card that we draft here is actually Flamespeaker's Will, which you guys don't actually have the opportunity to take a look at it on camera. However, I have my cards just sitting here in my draft pool in order, so I at least know what was drafted in what order and when. And it was funny enough because the guy sitting to the left of me, Colt, he actually asked me whenever he passed the last card whether I liked it or not, whether it was actually playable for me. And surprisingly enough, it ended up being playable for me. But I ended up putting it in post-board in one of my matchups to get rid of Armory. which was pretty relevant. So here in this pack, we have a few playable things. We have Flamespeaker's Will, we have Hoplite, we have Trailblazer, but we end up taking the Hoplite as just another addition to our arsenal of one-drop cards that end up just being fatties for us. I think that we just want to draft more red cards at this point, just to give us a little bit more consistency with the one-drops that we have, rather than kind of split our one-drops in two directions, which actually did end up happening because I drafted so many one-drops. I ended up drafting 3 of the white and 3 of the red. From here, we have the option to take Armaments, Oppressive Rays, Mogus's Warhound. There's Alcids as well, and we end up taking the Warhound. It's really weird how many Armament of Nyx there were going around. It seems like a card that's pretty common out of the packs, and I'm not sure whether it's just that consistency with the packs that we opened or if it's that consistency overall. But Armament's really awesome just because of that dual mode that it has. Being able to either use it on one of your creatures to just make it really threatening, or to just kind of pacify one of your opponent's creatures, is pretty nice. So here, nothing really way too playable. I mean, we have yet again another armament where we can take the Mortal Obstinacy, which I believe this is the final one that we pick up out of the 3 total ones that we actually have. So yeah, that's the third one that we have. Taking a look at my actual sheet here of drafted things. So that's the third one that we pick up, and the third playable one that we actually end up using. And right now, at this point, we still have a pretty long way to go, but we have a decent amount of actual playable things. So I'm actually pretty happy with what we have so far, and I'm feeling pretty confident with our actual pool overall. From here, Eidolon of Rhetoric, Mortal Obstinacy, Sightless Brawler. We end up taking the Sightless Brawler because it's a good card. We want more of them, and it plays into the armaments that we actually picked up earlier. Interestingly enough, with the armaments, I ended up drafting quite a few multiples of it, but I ended up only playing one of them and keeping others in the sideboard just to be able to use them, later if I actually needed to. Now, here in the pack, I take Phalanx Formation, and I actually wasn't sure of what this card was. I had to read it and make sure that it did what I thought it did. And yeah, it was an instant speed, give a creature double strike, and strive for 2, which is pretty awesome for us. So we ended up grabbing that. Here we have High Priest or Oppressive Rays, and usually I just want to grab that Oppressive Rays because it's kind of an annoying card. You can get around it by paying the 3 mana, but it's kind of a nuisance if your opponent has the ability to play it against you. Here I'm skimming through some of the white cards, then I end up just stumbling upon that Phalanx Formation, so I grab another one of those to give us 2 total ones that we end up playing. And in one of the games that I played, it ended up giving me lethal damage because my opponent did not block. My opponent was at 11, and I had a 5/5 heroic creature, swung with it. My opponent did not block, so I triggered off the heroic with the formation and swung in for 12 damage, which is a pretty sweet feeling. Here we have a Trailblazer that we grab. There wasn't really anything else that stood out. I mean, one drops that get bigger or one drops that get bigger, they're good. And it was kind of awkward just kind of building this deck. And we pick up another Trailblazer here. It was kind of awkward building this deck because you have your one drop split between 2 colors, so you always run the risk of opening up all of your white one drops, but just having a handful of mountains and stuff like that, which only ended up being kind of awkward for us once. But here there's the Armament or Array again. We're fit with that little option for us. We end up taking an Armament here because it's the only on-color thing for us, and it's pretty playable. But it seems like if any 2 cards showed up a lot together, it was the Armament and Rays, and that seemed like it seemed to be one of the choices that I had to make a lot with this draft. If you guys have noticed, those 2 cards just show up together a lot. Here there's Pensive Minotaur or Eidolon of Rhetoric, both which are kind of unplayable for me because I want to be more aggressive. So I ended up taking the Eidolon. Here, Supply Line Cranes, or I can't remember what the name of the black card is, but I was looking to see whether the card was actually hate draftable, and because it pretty much wasn't, I just ended up siding with the Supply Line Cranes. So the last card that we get here is a nice and foil Font of Return, and that is our drafting portion. Now, so let's talk about the deck. Alright, so now for our deck, the spells that we chose to play were 3 Satyr Hoplite, 3 Laguna Band Trailblazer, 2 Sightless Brawler, 3 Mogus's Warhound, 1 Sigiled Skink, 1 Harvest Guard Alcides, 2 Eagle of the Watch, 1 Acroan Mastiff, 1 Launch the Fleet, 3 Mortal Obstinacy, 1 Ajani's Presence, 1 Armament of Nyx, and 2 Phalanx Formations, along with 16 lands. So with this deck, because we were only going up to Converted Mana Cost 4, and we only had 1 card that we were playing in that Converted Mana Cost, I ended up just kind of going a little bit lower with my land count, which usually tends to be the case whenever I'm trying to play anything that's extremely aggressive. Because our cards like Warhound and the Sightless Brawler have the ability to come in and just as regular creatures as opposed to bestow creatures, we don't really have to worry about missing excessive land drops. Like if we are stuck on 3 or 4 lands or something like that, we can still cast our creatures and we can put them on the battlefield. However, if we get a little bit more lands and we're able to bestow them, then it just kind of works out for us. So I think that's kind of what the best thing about those bestow creatures is. Now, to talk about the cards that we didn't play, with cards like Magma Spray, the multiples of Armament of Nyx, and Oppressive Rays, they were much more sideboardable than anything, and I actually didn't end up siding in any of those cards. The only card that made a difference in any of my matchups was the Flamespeaker's Will. So Flamespeaker's Will ended up siding in against my last round opponent because he was playing Armory, and he was able to put Armory onto one of his Eagles, the Eagle of the Watch, and each time he would swing, the creature would get a +1/+1 counter, getting progressively bigger, and with that Vigilance becoming even more of a possible blocker for the things that I had going on. So my opponent ended up putting Armory on his dude on game 1 of round 3. I ended up still winning that game of the round. Game 2 he got there because I land flooded, and then game 3 I just went absolutely AWOL with dudes playing like I think it was turn 1 ended up starting off with Satyr Hoplite, then turn 2 Flamespeaker's Will and a Mortal Obstinacy, and then it was shortly followed by a Launch the Fleet, and it was just absolutely nuts. Then I think on turn 4 I cast both the Warhound and the Sightless Brawler just as creatures, having hit my 4th land drop on that turn. But ultimately, there was a little bit of variance that could have been done with the spells that were played, but ultimately it was pretty much just kind of consistency and just getting the best optimal cards into the main board as possible. Like the Mortal Obstinacy, like I mentioned before while discussing the draft, it hits the bestow enchantment creatures, so you have the benefit of hitting that. There is also the benefit of being able to hit the fonts in triple Journey in the Nyx. So if your opponent has a font that could let them gain 7 life or search for a land in the early game, especially if they missed a land drop, that is also fairly relevant for you to be able to note that and then be able to blow up that font if need be, if they're about to search their deck for another land on their following turn because maybe they played like the font and another creature or something like that in the situation. But the Obstinacy is pretty relevant. I think, if anything, the Armament and the Oppressive Rays, both in their own respect, have their playability, where the Armament's good up against like bigger creatures that your opponent may try to swing and just kind of alpha you with. Like, none of your creatures can really do anything except for chump, or maybe you can't even block that creature. Armament pretty much just nullifying the damage that that creature is dealing is pretty good. The only downside being that your opponent's creature still can block. It can take the hits, it just can't deal them itself. And Oppressive Rays being just kind of a lockout for any other aggressive decks that are just going to pop up against you. Like if somebody else is trying to be really aggressive with something similar in style, the Oppressive Race can just easily side in over other cards. Of course, it makes your deck a little bit slower. However, it keeps your opponent from smashing your face, and that ultimately is something that is fairly important. And especially like if my opponent had the Oppressive Rays and was able to play them against me, like if I go turn 1 Hoplite and I'm able to make it big, then my opponent just plays Oppressive Rays on it. It locks me out from being able to efficiently conduct my turns and conduct my battle phases, because now I have to worry about whether I'm actually going to go and cast a creature or something like that, or if I actually want to swing with my dude. And then I have to worry about my opponent having removal at like an instant speed or something like that, which was the case in the black-white deck where he had the instant speed black card that gives -X equal to hand size, which dealt with one of my creatures, and it was something that I wasn't really expecting, just because at an instant speed, a lot of things can happen, and especially this being the first time that I've drafted the format, there you can just kind of be a little bit more prone to getting beat by cards that you don't really expect. But ultimately, pretty good draft. I was extremely happy with it. It's always nice to go 3-0 and win an event. It's always a lot of fun to play really aggressive decks and limited that just turn things sideways and don't require a massive amount of thinking, especially with a huge amount of different lines of play that could be conducted. Still, with any deck, there is a lot of thinking that's involved, but I think with aggro decks, it's much more linear than anything else, and those decks are actually relatively fun to play because a lot of people like to draft big fatties in limited, and beating them before they get to play them is always really sweet. And on that note, we are going to wrap it up here and call it a day for this draft commentary. So if you guys have any suggestions or comments about the draft commentary series, anything that you would like to, for us to improve on or emphasize on in future episodes, please leave it down in the comments below. We definitely want to improve on this. It's definitely really nice to be able to talk for 25+ minutes about limited and kind of like my thought process and stuff like that, but at the same time I want this to be as short as possible while being as efficient as possible and getting everybody to the point where they're understanding limited and getting better at it, while I myself am getting better at limited as well. But otherwise, thank you guys for watching, and until next time, peace out. If you guys want to keep up to date with everything that we have going on here at Absolute MTG, remember to hit that subscribe button, like us on Facebook, and follow us on Twitter for all of your Magic the Gathering needs. Also, remember to check out our sponsors of the channel, MTG Madness and AVUgames.com. But as always, thank you guys for watching.